Good morning. I am calling to order our regularly scheduled meeting of the Committee of the Whole. My name is Elizabeth Glidden. I'm the chair of this committee, and I am joined today by council members Andrew Johnson, Yang, Quincy, Goodman, Fry, and Palmisano, and together we are a quorum of this committee. We have 3 items on our discussion agenda. The first is, I believe, a short item, but it always seems to stimulate a little discussion. So I'm going to ask Mr. Carl to please present the 2016 proposed City Council and Committees calendar. Thank you so much.
Good morning, Madam Chair. May it please the committee, staff is here to present the draft 2016 Council Standing Committees calendar. Copies should be before you at the desks. Extra copies are available with the clerk. The calendar shows those dates and times that have been identified for regular meetings in 2016, both for the full City Council, for its standing policy committees, as well as for the audit and executive committees, which are independent committees. The annual calendar of meetings serves as public notice required under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.04, Subdivision 1. Copies of the adopted calendar are posted on the bulletin boards located outside of the council and clerk offices, and data is also posted about these meetings to the city's website via our Legislative Information Management portal. As in the past, the draft 2016 calendar was prepared using guidelines that respect the observance of various holidays, significant dates, and planned events and activities. It also reflects the input from council members, particularly the chairs of the various standing committees and the coordinators in the clerk's office. For 2016, the draft calendar reflects the following details: a total of 23 regular meetings of the City Council, which is equivalent to what has been programmed in each of the previous 3 calendar years. A total of 7 designated ward work weeks, which matches the number of such weeks in the current calendar year. A total of 11 holidays that are recognized by the City of Minneapolis and are denoted on the calendar with hearts. The legend at the bottom of the page identifies the specific recognized holidays. There are also 5 significant dates that are included on the calendar based on prior policy direction from the City Council when public meetings by the City of Minneapolis are not to be scheduled. These are denoted on the calendar with an X. In addition, the annual conferences for the National League of Cities are shown on the calendar identified in parentheses. The dates for those conferences are March 5th through 9th and November 16th to 19 in 2016. I'd like to thank all of the council members and committee coordinators for the work to finalize this calendar. Each year we've gotten a little bit better at bringing it forward earlier in the year, and that in turn helps city departments to plan their work activities for the next succeeding year with greater lead time, which makes the entire enterprise work a little bit better. So thank you to all of you for your help and assistance in getting this done in a timely manner. And with that, I've completed my prepared remarks on the 2016 draft council calendar committee.
Thank you. I am going to ask if, I'm sorry, I'm not up on my speaker management. I'm going to ask if there are questions or comments on the draft, which hopefully will soon not be a draft, council calendar. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, Casey, did you vet this issue of the last council meeting of this year is like a month from the first council meeting of next year? And what happens if there is, and in CD, we often have bond issuances, or what's going to happen?
So if we needed to conduct a special meeting, we would have ample time to provide that notice and call a special meeting. You'll note that on this year's calendar, which sadly I don't have in front of me, we do have an extra council meeting scheduled in a week where there are no committee meetings. And we did that as a placeholder in case there was business at the end of the year that needed to be done. At this point, as we're approaching November, what I'm hearing from committees and from departments is that we likely will not need that meeting, and so we could cancel it. We just didn't program in the extra meeting for a full council meeting in that last week. In this year's calendar. And to be clear, we had not done that in previous years. This year's calendar is the first time we've added an extra meeting at the end, so we typically haven't needed it.
Madam Chair, perhaps Council President Johnson, just with her knowledge of the system, I mean, isn't that last meeting like the 19th of December? And is it possible that we would not have a single, I just can't imagine in CD we wouldn't have something between the 19th of December and the 15th of January. So has this been vetted?
I'll just kind of add in, as someone who used to chair the regulatory services portion, which is the one that kind of has the most items come up. This was always a challenge and concerning because of the big gap in being able to issue so many
licenses,
things that feel, frankly, a bit administrative, but go through the council process. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, I think Councilmember Goodman, we had an equally large space this year. If I remember correctly, I think our last council meeting was perhaps the 12th or something like that, and we didn't meet until mid-January. So, but I do think it is a good idea to program in a meeting, potential meeting, and then give staff a heads up. We're going to cancel it if we don't have issues, so that people have notice to make holiday plans.
Oh, no, I agree, Madam Chair. Council President Johnson, I have agenda setting at 11 today, so I'll talk to Reg Services staff directly and ask them to try to plan for. I agree that's not exactly a big sidewalk cafe approval month, but if you've seen the Reg Services agenda, there have been on average 10 licenses. New licenses or expansion licenses every single meeting, except for this one where there were 10 land sales. So I guess if we had to have a meeting, we could do it to not hold people up. Kind of in the theory of business made simple. I don't think we want to have a month where we're telling people you have to wait an entire month. But I'll note in agenda setting today that folks should pay attention to that.
And Madam Chair, if I might respond again to Councilmember Goodman, the other thing I think we should acknowledge is if we do have a meeting that is a meeting to act on emergent matters, that we will recognize that there will be people that won't be there because they've made plans and that sort of thing. So we just need a quorum, obviously.
Madam Chair, if I might, given that discussion, if the council would like, before final action, we can program in, as we did this current year, a council meeting in that first ward work week, which is the week of December 12th. We could program in a council meeting. It's easier to cancel the meeting than it is to call a special meeting.
All right. So with that, which I think is some general direction we'll kind of follow up on later, I'd like to go ahead and move approval of the calendar and the related items, which are about directing the clerk to post it and incorporate changes into the 2016 calendar as necessary to accommodate the work of the council. So with that, all in approval. Is there discussion? I'm not seeing it. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That item is approved.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carl. Second, we have a presentation from the City Coordinator's Office. This is an update on enterprise racial equity work. And I will note for colleagues that there is an associated staff direction that after the presentation, we can move that is authored by myself and Councilmember Quincy that we have worked on with the Coordinator's Office. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, council members, for being here for this topic. My name is Nuria Rivera-Vandermeide. I am Deputy City Coordinator. Still takes me a while to get the new title out. I am joined today by Joy Marsh Stevens, who is one of our new 2 dedicated managers of equity and inclusion, who, along with myself, started with the city a little over a month ago. So today I've been asked to let you know where we are on our enterprise racial equity efforts. And I don't intend to go through, you've got a handout before you, I don't intend to go through every one of the items bit by bit, although I'm certainly happy to respond to any questions about particular items, but wanted to start with the main focus areas, which in the past the work has really focused on 4 main buckets, if you will. They have been procurement, recruitment and hiring, boards and commission, and then the development of a racial equity assessment tool, a tool or set of tools, really, by which departments could guide their work, inform their choices as we moved on. As I mentioned before, we've been lucky in the coordinator's office to have not just Joy join us, but Julie Learson, who is also a manager of equity and inclusion and will be concentrating her efforts primarily in the community, initially with the Promise Zone, but with the notion to continue to look for strategies that will work across citywide. As I move towards, we wanted to keep it in the buckets, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I'm presenting the information. You'll see 2 colors. One is in yellow. The others are in shades of blue. I wanted to denote for council the yellow items were the items that had been initially worked on in the past, the main focus of a group that had been comprised initially of civil rights, CPED, NCR, and human resources throughout the city. And those are in different stages of action and implementation, in part because we've also transitioned a lot of the racial equity work now to the coordinator's office as a place that goes across departments and has the power of convening to really bring departments together. So as we look at the first one, which is the Racial Equity Assessment Toolkit, there had been some discussion and some work performed on moving that forward. There had been a modified racial equity assessment tool that had been used for business planning. I will say that that same tool had been offered to departments, and departments had used it for purposes of budget as well. The city is also part of a liaison or an organization, which is GARE, which is Government Alliance on Race and Equity. And it is a cohort. Currently, there are several cohorts, but there is one in the Midwest and a cohort of 8 jurisdictions, including ourselves, and where we share best practices and what's going on in other cities, St. Paul, Michigan, Iowa. There's several, the Minneapolis Park Board, Met Council. There are several jurisdictions in our cohort. And while that was the initial state of work there, I want to just note for your attention all the remaining work that has happened in the interim since we last met. There has been a series of training. There are a series of initiatives. I know for myself, I'll highlight in Reg Services, we created a racial equity champions group. We have a 3-point or a 3-pronged approach where we want to do train the trainer and do a cultural assessment for staff, meet them where they are, try to make sure that we're all talking the same language. But conversely, I also think that there's a point where hiring managers require implicit bias training, where you have the power and the authority to move someone, promote someone, impede someone from getting promoted. Then I believe there's got to be some additional awareness of that. And in Reg Services, we had started using that tool. We had also contacted with the YWCA to do a train the trainer model approach as we moved forward. Human Resources has also been thinking about and contracting, looking for implicit bias training amongst themselves, looking to train HRGs and promoting that throughout the department. And I'll make a point at the end of this presentation that you'll see several departments are looking at similar items. Training is one, and where several departments seem to, on their own, siloed, looking at a variety of things that are similar. And one of the benefits, and I think one of the actions moving forward, and I think Ms. Stevens has done an excellent job at starting to meet with departments, is really figuring out how do we align those efforts. Instead of everybody kind of doing it on their own, how do we come together, share best practices, know what resource or what company, what contract worked, what didn't, so that we're not all wasting resources on very similar activities. As we move a bit to procurement, procurement in this sense, and you'll see some of the, if you take a scan at some of the items that are included in that, we've called procurement kind of broadly. At some point, I think we want to extend the concept of procurement to mean something along the lines of economic equity as well. And so there are things that will go beyond the scope of the initial procurement activity. There had been some work done to look at supplier diversity, and that has been started but not yet moved forward with some specificity. There has been a lot of work in civil rights in particular to identify some regional and national compliance best practices, and that has been an exciting part there. There is some work happening with IGR that is looking at the Minnesota statute 16C to understand, and that is the state procurement statute, to understand if we can broaden the application of that, or look at how that really does apply to our city procurement or supplier diversity efforts. The assessor's office has been looking at figuring out how there are disparate outcomes on property valuation appeals, and that is something they plan to do in the future, and they're hoping to do that in 2016. So there has been some initial work done on the topic. But more work needs to be done to consolidate and align and be more directive about that work in general. The next bucket has been recruitment and hiring. And as I mentioned, there has been also a lot of work by individual departments in this area. The initial items that had been worked on by Human Resources in particular really talked to recruitment efforts, making it easier for people to apply to be part of the city, revising the new hire orientation. But as that has progressed in the past year and a half, we have seen a movement towards really trying to get into the specifics of what departments do. The police department has revamped and diversified their interview panel for new police officers. I'm sure you will hear a little bit more about this with IT, as I believe Mr. Dahl is speaking to you afterwards. But they have done a whole lot of work with diversifying their workforce and their work with people of color in particular to see how we can attract more persons with technology backgrounds. There is a really great work being done between 311, 911, CPED, and Human Resources that is partnering with community college to create pathways, and that really is focused on our 311 and 911 jobs. And so there's been a variety of work in the background that has been worked on by departments as the conversation around equity and what that means for us in departments really looks like. Fire, I should point out too, has been extraordinary in their work throughout the community. Their work in particular with young kids, they've got a Pathways program in North and Roosevelt that has been really extraordinary, and I know they are really proud of the work they have done there. In our last bucket, if you will, the original scope of work surrounding boards and commissions was figuring out strategies to ensure that our boards and commissions are adequately representative of our diverse communities. And there has been a lot of great work, I know, done by the city clerk's office, done by NCR to create more awareness, to train, to try to get candidates to come into and want to be a part of the city. More work continues to be done. I know Civil Rights has been working on trying to improve representation on the Civil Rights Commission. And in addition, as that work, and again, it's the great, as we talk about racial equity and as the conversations have unfolded, it's been a really great opportunity for departments at all levels to think about what does inclusion mean. And so while the initial work focus on boards and commissions started very narrowly, a lot of what we will turn our focus to will be community engagement and inclusion efforts that really speak to that as well, that speak to finding ways to be more inclusive with our work. There are a series of initiatives, some that are in various stages, again, some active, some pending. There are a variety of initiatives that involve translation of materials, that involve simplification of materials, that involve trying to get more resident involvement in the work that each department does. I know that there have been a lot of work with the Blueprint for Equitable Engagement that NCR has done, and they have done extensive community engagement. I believe that will be going forth to council, if not by the end of this month, by November. As that moves forward. There's a series of creative city making conferences that have been coordinated efforts between Intermedia Arts, the city coordinator's office, and individual departments to figure out how to bring an artistic voice to some of the work that we do. Electoral Engagement is one of them, and that is one that's involving the city clerk's office on how to nurture a culture of electoral engagement. IT similarly has another project themselves to increase access to computers and increase technical skills throughout communities. I am very proud and excited to talk about Tenant Voices, which is an initiative that starts in Reg Services, which has a really interesting theatrical approach to figuring out and trying to lend the tenant's ear to some of the work that we do throughout Reg Services. I also wanted to speak a little bit and highlight the work that the health department is doing in this area. Health in general has been a department that has been very culturally aware of how their work affects communities and how their work can impact communities as they move forward. I want to say that having worked so closely with the folks in environmental health, the work that they're doing, particularly for trainings with restaurant owners in cultural communities is extraordinary. They are offering the first time a Somali restaurant security food safety class in Somali. They have done a lot of work with the Latino community in terms of the similar issues with how do you keep restaurant sanitation rules, what to expect in an inspections process, but they have really done extraordinary work as we move forward in the area of racial equity. All this to say that there are a lot of efforts out there, and I'm really excited to see that the work has not stalled. I know that sometimes in the absence of information, there is a sense that we have not moved forward on some of the works that departments are doing, and departments are really being conscientious about trying to serve the needs of their community, which is something that I know from my past hat I try to do every day. I'll let you know what's next on our horizon, which I think, again, Joy has done a really good job of meeting with departments. She has been doing a kind of a scan and interviews. We believe that those interviews should be finished by mid-November of this year. We are planning really, as you can see, of coordinating and better aligning the work that we do as a city, because a lot of this crosswork could be really made more effective if we were actually sharing resources, trying to do things together, get efficiencies out of more collective work, if you will. We would hope to have a draft enterprise framework with initiatives, milestones, and timelines ready to pass to departments and to council members by the end of November, mid-December. And what for us that means really is from the stuff, or I shouldn't say stuff, from the great work that has been put forward by departments, what does that mean? Where is the meat on the bones? We want to be able to really identify particular and specific activities and tasks of what that looks like so that we can share with you and keep ourselves accountable for how we move forward with this work in the future. So it is our plan to, before the end of the year, to share a more detailed accounting of what we're all doing and what that looks like for next steps. We also want to ensure that the work that we do is aligned between our internal facing, not just the team that, or the work that, I shouldn't say team because you are a team of one, the work that Ms. Stevens is doing, but also aligning that with what the innovation team will be doing as they are tasked with doing things and looking for initiatives with a racial equity lens, but also wanting to make sure that we align that with the work that's being done out in community. And again, we have another manager of equity who is looking at Promise Zone, but really also with the lens of not just stopping at Promise Zone, but looking to see if we can scale some of those initiatives in other areas of opportunity throughout our city. So with that, I am happy to stand for questions.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to see if there are questions on the presentation. Council, what was that? Oh, I'm also looking down the line here. So, Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just one thing I want to just put out there, and there's some things I'm going to have to contact individual departments because I'm not clear about some in human resources what micro equity training is. I don't know what that means. And that I'm curious about the fitness. There's a lot of emphasis on fitness, both in the police and fire. So I'll check in on those. But the other thing that I'm really kind of interested in chatting with people who serve on some of our boards and commissions, you know, that we don't get into we pointed out in this report that civil rights, you know, tries to really reach out into communities of color. And I appreciate that. And I've tried to help, you know, recruit people from my ward. And it's a challenge for people who are working people sometimes to sit on boards and commissions because they just don't have the time. One thing that we've done in the past, and I really want us to look seriously at this again, is providing some sort of a daycare stipend for people who serve on boards and commissions. We used to do that long ago when I served on the Public Health Advisory Committee and I had 3 little kids. That really helped. And, you know, you can get away for an evening and do your community service and, you know, educate yourself. It's a two-way deal. So I want us to look at that again. We did away with that during the terrible budget crunches in the early 2000s. But it's a relatively, you know, inexpensive thing. And we do, I think, pay for parking for most people if they come in and have to park downtown, which is another thing. So I want us to look at that again. The other thing I want us to be careful about is not being focused exclusively like on civil rights. That's where we have to, you know, make sure that we attract people of color. We need to attract people of color to click to the Planning Commission, to the Board of Adjustment, to the Heritage Preservation Commission. If one would look at the geographic makeup of those groups, aside from CLIC, where we have individual ward representatives, it's an embarrassment, I will tell you. And it's not like we don't have qualified people of color in our community that are architects, planners, historians. So those are boards that are, it seems to me, more, aside from civil rights, more directly accountable to the council, and they really need to be looked at in an outreach that is significant. So those are the comments I have, and I appreciate all the good work of staff across the enterprise. And as I say, I'll look for some more specifics on these couple of things that I have questions about. Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this report and update. I have to say it's a little bit overwhelming to go through and dig through all the lists and figure out what the actual things that are going on in all the individual departments. How do they connect, and how do they have to do with some of the past action that we've taken, like the resolution in 2012 to set up our equity assessment and our toolkit. And so I'm kind of tracking and seeing how that connects. I know that a couple of the things that were also part of that resolution, one of them is identified that we would join the regional effort of everybody in. And so I hope that's continuing. I still am a representative on that group, and I know that they're trying to push issues, especially with employment equity and disparities. When I was looking at this, what next steps are, I really appreciated seeing that we would get a draft enterprise framework with initiatives. It did make me wonder if that is the racial equity action plan, because we also committed as a council a year and a half, 2 years ago, I can't remember when now, to develop a racial equity action plan, which is a little bit different than this inward-facing toolkit issues. So I'm assuming that's not necessarily it. So you can clarify that, and then I'll just ask one more question, because milestones and timelines were mentioned, and I think what would really be helpful also is what are objectives, what are the measurable outcomes we want? Are we trying to actually change the makeup of our workforce? What's the change supposed to be? How are we going to measure success that our toolkit and all these efforts have made a difference? And I think we need to nail that down pretty soon too.
Council Chair, Council Member Gordon, thanks so much for your comments. And I want to say that this is, and I agree, when I first met with Joy and saw the compilation of all the work that's going out there, I had obviously heard of some of the efforts, but didn't know what all the departments were doing. And one of the things this is trying to illustrate in a very quick update is just the breadth of departments that are working on the issue, but we understand that by no means does this provide the detail and the mapping, the very correct mapping of how does this relate to some of the past council directives, how does this relate to each other, and how to better align, which is really something that we discovered as we were going through this exercise, that there needs to be a more coordinated effort to maximize resources. So as we move forward in the future, we will be trying to capture where those past directives have been and where they live in the very specific initiatives. As to your question, and we certainly will also be looking to figure out what those objectives and metrics and measurements is. We are a data-driven city, and we want to make sure that as we move forward that we are able to somehow show that we are moving the dial on equity, because otherwise we are sitting here doing good work that feels great, but we want to be able to show that it's actually making a difference to community. As to the Racial Equity Action Plan, it is certainly something that I'm aware of in terms of a council directive. This initiative right now is meant to really address the framework of what the internal facing stuff in the first place, but we are aware and conscious of the Racial Equity Action Plan, and will be, as we move forward, talking to develop what that looks like and coming forward with where we think that directive should go and what we can do for it. So we'll be addressing it.
And if I could, I was also noticing in the long list in the departments that are involved, all the work that's going on, and I'll just say that it was good to see that. I think sometimes we're up here and we try to be leaders and make policy, and really what we're trying to do is create some culture change throughout the enterprise, and we wonder if we've done anything to do that. And I think even though we maybe didn't shift it really clearly in our ordinances and our policies as clearly as some of us, at least one of us, might have liked, I think we're seeing, staff, city workers, we were all eager to somehow engage in this work and get a handle on what's happening to help solve this problem, and I think you're showing that we have. There's one area that I didn't see much in the list, and I just want to highlight a little bit, which is this work that the Department of Justice is doing with the police department, and it's not necessarily the Department of Justice now, but it's a program and funding that they're offering. And we heard a presentation about implicit bias and working on implicit bias with the police force, and I think that's a piece of this work, and that implicit bias that hopefully the police force is working on is also something that comes up again and again. Here, I think is that there is a bias we're not aware of sometimes when we're hiring, promoting, making decisions, budgetary decisions, and all these things. And so it might be something to add to the list or consider it as it's pending work or work in progress, and also something that it might benefit the police department to have the equity team actually engaged in and reviewing and helping have another set of eyes on, even though we're relying on academics in far off states of the country to help us.
Council Chair, Councilmember Gordon, one of the things that I wanted to highlight, thank you for reminding me to mention that if you're not seeing a particular department, and police is a great example of that, it's in part because we haven't had an opportunity to talk to them. They are slated to meet with Ms. Stevens in early to mid-November. I'm not recalling the exact date, but one of the reasons that we weren't able to finish interviews was in part that we hadn't met with them. There are, I believe, just a few more departments left to complete the work, but once that work, it will be folded in and again mapped out so that we include everybody's efforts into what we're doing.
Thank you. And so that's what the finalized department interviews by mid-November 2015 is all about?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Council member